Captain Picard is one of the most iconic and beloved Starfleet captains of all time. As a leader, he's decisive yet fair. He's also always ready to jump into a fight if he needs to. In this live stream, we will count down the most memorable Captain Picard episodes from Star Trek: The Next Generation. So grab your saddle and your merry men.
I am not a merry man!
And let's start the show. Welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. And today we are talking about the man, the myth, the legend, Captain Picard. Now, a caveat before we get started, I'm going to be counting down some of the most memorable moments from The Next Generation. So I'm not going to be talking about Picard's cameo in Deep Space Nine, and I am not going to be talking about Picard's actions in Picard, especially since that whole show is technically about Picard, but like, how much of Picard do we actually see? And then there's a whole thing there. Anyways, I am so excited to get into today. We have a lot of episodes to cover. I've got 10 major episodes and one honorable mention, whittled down from a list of like 33. So without further ado, let's get started. Oh, actually, before I say that, there are timestamps below. So if you want to skip ahead to any episode in the list at any time, feel free to do that. Without further ado, we're going to get started with episode 10 on the list. Season 3, episode 19, Captain's Holiday. Picard's vacation on Risa is interrupted when he becomes embroiled in a quest to recover a powerful artifact, the Tox Utat, which is being pursued by Ferengi and mysterious time travelers. As he partners with the enigmatic Vosh, he uncovers and safeguards the device before it falls into the wrong hands. Despite the lack of Jamaharon, Picard still manages to enjoy his long overdue shore leave. So this is one of the more silly, lighthearted episodes that had to go on the list. I have two. The next one's pretty silly also. But I had to put some silly, lighthearted episodes in the list of best Picard episodes because even though we tend to think of him, or at least I tend to think of him as this master diplomat, which he absolutely is, there are also facets to his personality. And I didn't want all the episodes to be really heavy or really sad. I kind of wanted to pick a mix that just shows us how incredible this character is and how versatile. This episode is so fun. This is what we call like the Indiana Jones episode, right? Where he goes on this quest to get this artifact and all of this. We get to see Captain Picard's love of archaeology, which I think is just a fun backstory. I'm not big on TOS. Like, that is not a part of my zone of genius. That's something that I need to investigate. So I don't know what Kirk's thing was. Like, if we got to know more of his backstory or like things he's into other than ship stuff and space stuff. But I do like when we find out these little pieces about some of our most beloved characters, especially our captains, that kind of tell us what they would be like if they weren't a captain. And I'm even thinking of kind of like Janeway and stuff like that, and other captains. I'm thinking, do we know of their outside hobbies? I don't know. But this I've always loved about Picard, that he's got this passion for archaeology. It seems totally random to me, but I always love when they sprinkle it into episodes. And we're going to see a couple more examples of that throughout this list. For this episode, we get to meet Vosh, who I think is just a really fun character. Vosh is like the anti-Picard, right? She's a bad girl and she doesn't follow the rules, and, she makes her own way and she's pretty adventurous. Not that Picard's not adventurous, but I wouldn't use that word to describe him, And I think she's just like a good match for Picard in the sense that she gets him out of his comfort zone, which he needs. And this whole thing is about him being on vacation, so he needs to get out of his comfort zone. And what's funny about it is when he goes to Risa, I was going to say this planet, but we all know Risa. When he goes to Risa, he's thinking like, okay, the way for me to really relax and unwind is for me to just lay here with my chest out and get tanned and read a book, or, just read Shakespeare. That's all I want to do. And instead, he gets pulled into this Indiana Jones style, like heist or whatever, which is not relaxing, right? It's not just like sitting still by the beach reading a book, but it is actually what he did need. This is exactly what he needed to unwind. He needed an adventure, but one where it didn't have Borg, one where he didn't get assimilated, but one that really did have stakes. I mean, he was at gunpoint at least once, or phaser point, or whatever that little weapon was, at least once in this episode. He had romance, he had adventure, he had a cool little shovel where he was just like digging up to try to find this ancient artifact. This episode's a lot of fun. I highly recommend if you haven't seen it in a while. It's a very popcorn episode. There's no like deeper mystery. There's no societal conversations that I really pull from this episode. It's just a good time. And it gives us the character of Vosh, who we get to see a couple more times in Trek lore, which also is fun because in shows like TNG, they're episodic and we don't always get a where are they now. Almost all of the characters we just meet one time. And some of them, it's like, oh, I would love to see that character again. So Vosh, thankfully, is one of the characters we do get to see a few more times. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to hit the next episode on the list. Hello to everyone who is watching live. Hello to everybody on the replay. At the time of this recording, it is New Year's Day where I'm at. So Happy New Year. Let's see. I love this from PS2 Chipper. Nadia's here. Finally, the party can get started. I love that. Carlos says, I thought this episode was very Indiana Jones as well. And don't we love Indiana Jones, or is that just me? And we're not counting Crystal Skull and Beyond because like we're just not. But like the originals, you know, like how fun they were and exciting and the adventure and the romance and the madness. It was just so much fun. Okay, so let's go to the next episode on the list. Season 4, Episode 20, Cupid. Q transports Picard and the crew into a Robin Hood-inspired fantasy as punishment for Picard's denial of romantic feelings towards Vosh. Cast as Robin Hood, Picard must rescue Vosh from an arranged marriage to Sir Random Guy. The reward for Picard and crew saving the day is that Vosh decides to join Q and explore the multiverse. So this episode is our second on the list that is just fun and silly and lighthearted. I think this is our last one on the list that's a lighthearted, silly episode. The rest are pretty serious. But I love this episode. Q, it's a little hit or miss. Some of the Q episodes I'm like, ugh. But some of the Q episodes I'm like, wee. And that's this one. This is just fun. It's silly. There's no space battles. There's no Ferengi in this one or anything because it's all taking place in this Sherwood Forest like simulation or whatever. But it's really fun. It's fun to see the characters be totally different. They're pulled into this weird world and they have to navigate it and try to, save the day. It's not like a holodeck program gone rogue where if you finish the program, it ends. The program ends and then you get released and now you're fine. You're safe. Because Q is doing it, the only way it will end is when Q decides that it ends. And this again is like a nightmare scenario. To be trapped in a situation that Q controls is always bad news, because he's just a scamp. He's just a rascal. And 9 times out of 10, he's doing something ridiculous. Other times, like in this case, he's doing something ridiculous, but in a really menacing way. So if you go back and watch this episode, if you haven't seen it in a while, even though the context is really lighthearted, it's like, oh, we're merry men. Oh, Geordi's got his little lyre. I don't know, whatever that little thing is called, the little banjo or whatever, and then Worf takes it and smashes it against the tree. And then he's like, sorry, and hands back the little twig fragments left of it. Like there's a lot of funny parts in it, but all the scenes with Q are very dark and sinister. And you're like, Q is a bad guy, which I don't really think of him as a bad guy, maybe in Encounter in Farpoint, but I feel like Encounter in Farpoint is more of a fever dream than anything that I could take seriously. But when you see him in Hide and Q and Deja Q and stuff, I can't say, like, I don't think of him as a villain, right? He's not helpful all the time, but he's not like really like scary. He's not trying to be scary. And in this episode, he is pretty scary. All the scenes that he has with Picard, you're like, yikes, what is this guy's problem? Thankfully, in the end, he just returns them all to their normal lives because I guess he's done with this whole charade. And then his reward is that he gets to run off with Vosh. So it's a little bit like, man, you saw Picard finally found somebody who he likes spending time with romantically because he has breakfast with Beverly Crusher every single day, but they are like refusing to act on that or whatever. But you found somebody that he's willing to tell people he likes, and your first response is to like try to take her away. But at the same time, I can't even be mad at Q because I think Vosh is actually a much better fit for Q than for Picard in the long run. My co-host for the TNG podcast, which you can find the link in the description if you have not yet listened to our podcast, she said that she feels like Vosh and Picard are like a summer fling or like a spring break fling, where it's like, oh, this is so fun. Oh, you're so different. But like, we're not going to be together long term because we're just not a fit. And I think that's true. Vosh is always going around stealing artifacts and living her best Indiana Jones life. Picard's pretty stable and pretty settled and pretty committed to Starfleet. He's not going to be going off on any wild goose chases. So in the long run, they're not a good match. However, Q and Vosh seem genius, right? Because Vosh is like the less powered version of Q as far as being a rascal and always getting into trouble. I don't want to say she has no powers because she has resourcefulness and she's so clever. In this episode specifically, when she finds herself in Sherwood Forest, she finds herself in the castle of Sir Guy, and he comes in and he's like, we are to be married and blah, 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 blah. Now, she doesn't even know anything about Q as far as I know. She has no idea. She wasn't on the ship at the time. She was off doing whatever, and then suddenly finds herself in this scenario. Instead of her being like, who are you? Where am I? What's going on? Am I dreaming? Or any of those normal questions that like a regular person would ask, she instead immediately slips into character. And she's like, hello, what's your name, big fella? Oh, I'm so excited about our marriage. Like she is like the con woman of the century next to Ardra, who I actually think is the con woman of the century. So second place goes to Vosh, where she just slips right into it. And I think that's really impressive. And that alone is what makes her, I think, a good match for Q. Those are my thoughts on Cupid. Let me know. Is this an episode that you actually like? Do you not like it? Do you think it's funny? Do you think it's stupid? Let me know in the comments. I'm going to check the chat and then we'll hit the next episode on the list. When Grace says, I guess if you date Patrick Stewart in real life, you get to be a recurring character, LOL. Because the actress who played Vosh was dating Patrick Stewart, the actor who plays Picard at the time, which was a little awkward because he was definitely married. But I don't know. I don't know all the stuff that went into the background. I was not in a part of their marriage. This is stuff that I learned after starting the TNG podcast that I had no idea about at the time. And you know, with social media today, we would all know that. We would all be in the tea. PS2 Chipper says, if only Wesley could be as fun as Short Round. You know what? Okay, so the actor whose name I don't remember off the top of my head, but the actor who plays Short Round was doing this interview after he did Everything Everywhere All at Once. He did this interview talking about being at some event, and he was like in the green room or going to the green room or whatever, you know, where all the speakers or celebrities or whatever stay hidden from the masses before they need to come out on stage or whatever. And he was like making his way into the green room, and then he saw Harrison Ford talking to somebody outside of the green room, and he hadn't seen him since he was in Indiana Jones as a kid. And at this point, he's like 40. And in Indiana Jones, he was like 10, I think he said he was like 10 or 8 or something like that. So anyways, he's standing there and he wants to go talk to him to be like, oh my gosh, you know, like I haven't seen you in so long. But then he also feels some kind of way because, you know, I don't know. I always think celebrities don't feel like regular people, but apparently they do. So he's standing there waiting for his turn to talk to Harrison Ford. But he's also like, what if he doesn't remember me? Or what if he thinks I'm weird? Or he gets mad that I'm trying to talk to him because he doesn't want to talk right now or whatever. So he's having all these insecure thoughts in his mind. And Harrison Ford turns and looks at him and he goes, are you Short Round? And he goes, yes, Dr. Jones. And he's like, get over here, kid. And he gives him this big bear hug and tells him how proud he is of him and all this stuff. And it was just like, the most heartwarming clip. I was just totally in tears. Nothing to do with Star Trek, but just a fun little story. When Grace says, I love Cupid, I was shocked when I found out that people hate it. Just like I was shocked when I found out that people hated Wesley Crusher. You're like, what? How could anyone think that? Nadia says, 100%, I feel exactly the same way. I rewatch Cupid all the time. Cupid is such a fun episode. It's ridiculous. It's silly. I could see people not liking it. I could see people not liking it because it's so silly, kind of like Rascals. I love Rascals, but the woman who wrote Rascals hates Rascals because that is not what she wrote and it's not her vision. And she wrote something really dark and serious and they made it really silly, right? But I watched the show as a kid. So for me, I was like, an episode about kids, this one's for me. Like I loved it, but people hate it. I think it's for that same reason where just some people, that kind of humor just rubs them the wrong way, which tells me more for me. PS2 Chipper says, what happens on the holodeck stays on the holodeck. Does it though? I guess when it's trapped there, yes. Nadia says, I do like the Q and Vosh combo, although we find out in DS9 that as expected, shenanigans ensue. Exactly. So in DS9, it's like Q and Vosh can't stand each other, which also makes sense. That's why I think they're just like they're like a good married couple, right? They're perfect together and they are also going to clash because their personalities are going to clash. Picard is a diplomat. He is an ambassador. He is the person who's going to talk through difficulties and differences with his significant other. Vosh and Q are not. They're not going to talk through their differences. They're going to blame the other one. They're going to fuss and fight. And again, that's what makes them so good together, I think. Nadia says, I protest. I am not a married man. I love that line from Worf. I only just saw your comment about short round. Randall says, oh, Stuart, you scallywag. Yeah, about the drama going on between him dating the actress who played Vosh and whatever was going on. I don't even know all the details, and I don't want to know because it's, yeah. I have this thing about like trying to separate the characters from the actors so that way it doesn't tarnish my love of the characters. Okay. With that said, let's hit the next episode on the list. Season 2, Episode 9, The Measure of a Man. When Starfleet orders Data to undergo a procedure to be dismantled and studied, Captain Picard argues for Data's rights as a sentient being. In the ensuing legal trial, Picard and Riker serve as opposing counsel in a groundbreaking debate about what constitutes life and personhood. The ruling affirms that Data is a sentient being deserving of equal rights. So here's our first episode that takes a turn as far as tone. It's no longer light and fun and silly and merry men and little tiny banjo things. In this case, we're talking about what it means to be sentient, which is such an important question. Does Data deserve rights or not? Is he a thing or is he a person? And in rewatching this episode, I was reminded that Bruce Maddox, the scientist guy who wants to take Data apart in this episode, refuses to refer to Data as he or talk to Data directly. He's very stuck on this Data is an it situation. Data is a thing. Data is a robot. And even though clearly it's a male-formed robot, Bruce Maddox does not want to call Data he. So the whole time, like even in the scene that I just showed, where Picard says, explain to me what sentience, like what does that mean? What's the definition? And Maddox is like, well, you have to be intelligent, you have to grow, you have to this, you have to that. And Picard's like, well, isn't that true of Data? Is Data intelligent? And Maddox is like, yes, it's very intelligent. It can learn and grow or whatever. And it's just so freaking disrespectful. Like, it makes me angry. Kind of like, do you guys remember the episode when Pulaski is, I think it's the old ending episode. What is this episode called? Oh gosh. Oh, it's going to come to me. The episode where she gets really old. And she keeps calling Data Data. And he's like, that's not my name. That's not how you say my name. And she's like, what's the difference? And he's like, one is my name, one is not. And she's just like, whatever. That's how I feel about Maddox. It just makes me so angry on Data's behalf. Now, I will say Data is my favorite character. So I do feel like a kindred spirit with him. So maybe there's a little like projecting there. But also it's disrespectful for no freaking reason. Like you're going out of your way to be disrespectful. The fact that Maddox won't look Data in the eye or speak to him directly or refer to him as him, it's just like he wins the prize for one of the most punchable faces of Starfleet, which by the way, we made an entire list in the TNG podcast of punchable faces. You better believe Maddox is on that list. Anyways, this episode's great because Picard is the one who helps define the rights that Data has, being the only android in all of Starfleet. And Picard's the one who makes sure that Data is seen as a person and not as a thing, which is so important because, I mean, Maddox was going to disassemble Data without knowing exactly how to put him back. Would have lost Data forever because at this point, nobody knows that Noonien Soong is still alive, living on some random planet somewhere. So we would have had no more Data. And even more sad, we would have only had Lore. Come on now. Going around and conquering planets and trying to assimilate Borg and turn them into androids. I mean, this is not who we want in charge of things. So anyways, let me know your thoughts about this episode. It's a little bit dry of an episode, but this is one of those classic things that I love about Star Trek that does have that bigger mission, that does have, like, you can have a conversation in this episode about what it means to be human on so many different levels to this day, right? Even if we're not talking about AI or we're not talking about androids, we could still be talking about, class systems. We could still be talking about just what are human rights and who should get these rights. This conversation, of course, is continued in Voyager for the Doctor, who Janeway goes to bat for and Tuvok goes to bat for to prove that the Doctor is also sentient and also has rights, because obviously he does. And it's just such a powerful story that you can kind of repackage it a lot of times, especially in something like Star Trek, where we see all these aliens and we have lots of opportunities for conversations like this. So I love this episode because it shows what Picard is like as a leader, what he stands for, what he values. I also love that it shows that Starfleet's not perfect. And I think a lot of episodes show that. But I love that as far as, technology has taken people are still people. And we still need to learn and grow and work on acceptance and respect. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to head to the next episode on the list. Irish Carney says it's 2025. Naturally, so at the time of this recording, it's 2025. Naturally, the view out the window would be the arc of a planet. It's a science fiction sounding here. Yeah. So I'm guessing you mean this wallpaper that I have on my wall, which is just so freaking beautiful. And it's Earth, and it's like Earth just as like rotating. So the sun is showing, just love it. And I get to, this is actually also my bedroom. So I get to wake up to this every day. When Grace says, if you prick Data, does he not leak? I don't think he does, actually. I don't think Data does leak. He's got a neural net, but I don't think he has any, I don't know if he has a bloodstream. That's a good question, though. PS2 Chipper said, did you watch the interview with the writer? Are you asking if I watched? Well, first of all, no. But are you asking, did I watch the interview of the writer of Measure of a Man? I did not. Was that writer a lawyer? Because that would be really interesting. Nadia says, so many things to say about this episode, besides the important stuff. A, Bruce Maddox has a sleazy face. He makes me uncomfortable. I will say the actor who played Bruce Maddox did it so well. He did it so well. The scenes where he's sitting in the courtroom, he's kind of sitting with this lean, and he's just got this air of condescension. He nailed it. B, Philippa is the sexual harassment queen. Was she harassing Picard? I don't remember that part. After Ardra. Ardra was absolutely the sexual harassment queen, but Ardra's over here trying to steal a planet. She could care less about making somebody feel uncomfortable with her sexual harassment. Let's see. Data does not leak. So PS2 Chipper says Data does not leak, and that, yes, the writer was a lawyer. That's super interesting. So no, I did not, but you've got my email address, info@thescifisavage.com, if you want to send me that link and you have it handy. But no, I did not read anything that the writer said or watch the video. Okay. But I'm sure it'd be super interesting. With that said, let's hit the next episode on the list. Season 4, Episode 1, The Best of Both Worlds, Part 2. Picard's assimilation as Locutus of Borg places the Federation on the brink of defeat, forcing Riker to lead the crew in a daring rescue mission. The away team successfully kidnaps Locutus and uses his connection to the collective to send a signal that destroys them just in the nick of time. Data and Beverly repair the physical damage, but the emotional damage Picard has experienced is not so easily fixed. I wasn't sure whether or not I should include this episode on the list. I did because I think this is a pivotal, quintessential moment in the life of Captain Picard. It sets the tone for everything else from this point on. The trauma of being assimilated into a Borg and then being recovered from the Borg, but still having that kind of programming in him, has changed everything. His effect at Wolf 359 and how that affects Cisco and DS9, how nutso he is in the movie First Contact, because he's so upset about what happened to him and how he's just blasting away with a Tommy gun all of his former officers who have now been turned into Borg drones, because he's the Borg are evil and all this stuff. It's really, really impactful. And then the Borg come back up in Picard seasons 2 and 3. Oh, and 1. Yeah, season 1 also. Yeah, and all of Picard, the Borg come back up. However, the reason why I was thinking to not put this on the list is because we don't actually see Captain Picard being Captain Picard in this entire episode, except for the last 2 minutes. We see Captain Picard being Locutus. And so part of me is well, does this really show Picard, or does it really show Locutus? This episode really is not a Picard episode. It's really a Riker episode. It's really showing what does it look like when he has to step up and become captain. And I actually think he was pretty good. So really all the times that he turned down his captaincy, he didn't need to. He probably could have been a really good captain based off of how he performs in this episode. However, how can we talk about the best, most memorable Picard moments without talking about Best of Both Worlds Part 2? We can't. So I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you feel like this episode needs to be in this list of most important things that happen to Picard? Or do you feel like, well, it's really about Locutus, it's not really about Picard, and really the episode's highlighting Riker, so it's not really a Picard episode? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. In any case, this episode is one of my all-time favorite episodes. It is so good. And of course, you have to watch Best of Both Worlds Part 1 because that's the whole setup for Part 2. But Part 1 is really just like the backstory. It's just what's going on, what's the context. You have to see Picard get kidnapped. But 2 is where all the action is. That's when you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And I'm pretty sure it was PS2 Chipper who was the one who said, I think it was you. Let me know if that was wrong or if it was Win Grace. I don't know. Somebody here told me that the idea at the time was that Patrick Stewart, the actor who plays Picard, was not going to return at the end of Best of Both Worlds Part 2. He was going to stay Locutus, and then there, I guess there was going to be a shift change, and Riker was going to become captain. But then that didn't happen, and when I heard that news, I almost fainted because I did not know that either. And I also was wondering, would I have kept watching the show if that happened? And I don't know the answer to that question, but the show would have been very different. Imagine, because what was this, season 4? Season 4. So imagine if seasons 4, 5, 6, and 7 all had Riker as the captain. Like, what a different world that would have been. It's just like, I don't know, it's mind-blowing. And I'm like, do I want that or do I not want that? I don't know. But in any case, this episode itself is really, really good. I will say the episode after this, it's called Family. And it's when Picard goes back home to recover from this crazy trauma, right? He's got all the implants removed, but we do find out later that he can still hear the Borg Queen, which is just creepy. So I guess that means there's still some nanites floating around in his blood that are going to stay there forever. But anyways, he goes back home to recover and to kind of like get back to his roots and literally go back to Earth, bring himself back to Earth to get resituated before going back to continue to serve. And this is one of the few times where we see somebody taking time off for their mental health, which I feel like if anybody, the crew of the Enterprise D needs this a lot. There's a lot of times with a lot of crazy stuff going on where people just need a freaking break. And sometimes Rice is just not the deal. Sometimes like poor Geordi, he got kidnapped on his way to Risa and brainwashed and turned into the Manchurian Candidate. Sometimes you don't want to go to Risa. You just want to go somewhere else and chill out. Originally, this 3-parter was going to be a 2-parter. Originally, that whole episode Family was going to be part of Best of Both Worlds Part 2. So it was going to be like, we got Picard back. We removed the implants. He goes back home. He spends time with his brother, blah, 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 blah. I'm really glad they didn't do that because Best of Both Worlds Part 2 is like perfection. It's such a well-done episode. And it's really exciting. At the end, you're like, are they going to win or not? And then when you see Picard kind of recovered, and I think he just has like a little bandage where some of the implants were taken off of his face. And you see him like, he said something to Riker and like they walk out, Riker and Troy walk out or whatever. And he goes to sip his tea and he just stops and he just stares. And you're like, yes, because that's how we feel too as the audience with all of what just happened. You're just like, how can I just keep going and sipping tea? I need a moment to process. I'm really glad they made Family a whole nother episode because I think it would have taken away from the power of this episode. Also, I hate the episode Family. So I'm glad it's a separate thing so I don't have to watch it when I watch this episode. I can just go boop, next, and skip it. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we'll hit the next episode on the list. Doop, 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 doop. Okay. Irish Carney said, wrong, Data. Does he not seek revenge? Data does not seek revenge. I was going to say except for in the episode Descent Part 2, but he doesn't seek revenge there either. He's manipulated by Lore to torture Geordi, and it's awful. But even then, he doesn't seek revenge. Which, I guess it's just a human thing. I don't know. Part of his not being able to feel means not seeking revenge, maybe? Not sure. PS2 Chipper said, this episode could be an honorable mention. I agree with you there. This episode could be an honorable mention. So maybe if I ever do this list again, it will go there. Yes, the whole thing that happened in Best of Both Worlds Part 2 also affected Captain Sisko. Wingrace says Starfleet should have made Tommy guns standard issue after first contact, which is wild, right? Because we're usually seeing phasers, which are pretty damaging. If you remember the episode Vengeance Factor where Riker shoots Yuta and she just dissolves into like dust, those are pretty intense. But the Tommy guns also have this like visceral, just horror when you see Picard like just blowing people. You're like, oh my gosh, it's even more shocking somehow than seeing Yuta completely dissolve. Nadia says Riker would be a great captain if it weren't for the fact that all of his potential postings are doomed. Very true. Almost every ship, if not every ship, but almost every ship on the show that was offered to Riker and then he turned it down, later on explodes. So it's kind of like, he dodged a bunch of explosive devices apparently. However, he would make a really great captain, and obviously he does eventually become captain. PS2 Chipper says, yes, Picard had a contract. Yeah, Picard. I meant Stewart. Yeah, Patrick Stewart had a contract dispute, and I think you were the one, I think it was you, but somebody told me like that there was a chance where it could have just been Riker as captain. I think that would have been a really interesting show. PS2 Chipper says, another example of how Picard destroyed the canon. It really upset me when I found out they killed off Picard's nephew. Did they kill off Picard's nephew? I missed that. Did they mention that in Picard, like in season 1 or something? His little nephew, what was his nephew's name? Like Jacques or something? I did not know that. So refresh my memory on that. Yeah, holographic projectiles were coming out of the Tommy gun that were just as deadly as physical projectiles because, of course, the safety protocols were off so that Picard could plow down all of these Borg. Maybe here's a question. Why is that a possibility? Why can safety protocols be turned off in the first place? Why is that even possible? The fact that a holographic bullet still works is a problem. Like it shouldn't. That shouldn't do anything. So maybe there's some retraining that needs to happen. In Star Trek Online, I think that's the O, right? The game. They use holographic guards in the Starfleet prisons. Get out of town. Get out of town. Holographic guards. That's interesting. Have we ever seen holographic guards in the show? That's interesting. They mentioned Renee. Oh, that's his name, Renee. They mentioned the death of Renee in one of the films. I don't remember this at all. I don't remember this. How sad is that? PS2 Chipper says, AI overview, learn more. Jean-Luc Picard's nephew in Star Trek is Rene Picard, who died in a fire with his father. Oh no, the brother died also? Robert during his childhood. So Picard's brother also died in that fire? Yeah, I have no recollection of any of that. But how sad. How sad. Picard doesn't have that much family to lose. Okay, well, on that super depressing note, let's go to the next episode on the list. Season 5, Episode 2, Darmok. Picard is stranded on a planet with Captain Dathan of the Temerians, whose language is based on metaphors. Dathan's plan is to force them to cooperate against a dangerous predator and therefore seal their allegiance to each other. It's confusing, frustrating, and heartwarming all at the same time. So I remember when I first watched this episode as a kid, I did not like it. I very much did not like it. And I think that's because, Dathan's speaking in metaphors the whole time. You don't understand what he's saying. And you just see how frustrated Captain Picard is getting. And he's trying to interpret things and he's trying to figure it out. And then from time to time, they fight this invisible monster. I think for me as a kid, I just was like, this just seemed very boring. I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't get it. Why is there a monster? And then it's over. It just was not my favorite episode. Now, when we reviewed it for the TNG podcast, I was like, oh, this is going to be the worst. But when we watched it, and if you ever listen to the TNG podcast, we do like a scene by scene review of each episode. It's pretty nuts. So when we were peeling through the layers of this episode, I was like, actually, not only is this not a terrible episode, because I used to think it was bad. Not only is it not terrible, it actually should happen more often than it does. Right? The universal translator supposedly translates everything into whatever your your standard language is from your planet or from your, country, continent, state, city, whatever, so that you can understand what everybody's saying. But it stands to reason in a galaxy that's extremely diverse with all different kinds of life forms that there are going to be some life forms from time to time where the universal translator just doesn't work. Like it just doesn't. We saw that with the Shellyak in the episode Ensigns of Command, I think is the name of the episode. Don't know why that's the name of the episode, but I think that's that's the episode where Data tries to go and like save this colony of humans who crash landed on this planet, and the Shellyak are coming back and they're going to exterminate all the humans and take their planet. And they speak in some kind of like clicky sound, and their language is like so complicated that you can't directly translate. So the clicky sound has to be recorded and then it has to be like translated to text or whatever. But we don't often see times where you just don't understand what someone else is saying. And I feel like that should happen all the time. What's interesting in this case with Dathan and the Tamarians is that you understand all the words they're saying. They're just strung together in a way that makes no sense, which is also interesting because if you've ever used like Google Translate or something, the words can be translated word for word, but it's the meaning that you really need. It's the grammar. Like the order of the words actually matters for making a sentence that is logical. And that's a question again for the universal translator. How is it doing that? How is it taking what someone's saying? Because in theory, there would need to be some kind of delay, right? It would need to hear what you said and then reorder the words that make sense in everyone else's language. But it doesn't. It's instantaneous because it's science magic, right? So this is something that I feel like should happen all the time. So in this episode, it's like, yeah, you should run into people who you can't understand their language. In this case, what's weird is that you understand their language. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, you know, all the words they're saying, but the order they're using them in don't mean anything because their entire culture is based on stories, which if you don't have the cultural context, you won't understand a word they're saying because you don't know any of these stories, not any of them at all. And I think that made it really interesting. And then also seeing them work together was really good. It reminds me of this. Oh gosh, you guys might know this. I am not going to remember this, but there was this movie from the 90s where this UFO crashed on Earth, question mark. I do not remember the context, but there was a war between like humans and aliens, and one human plane crashed and one alien ship crashed, and they both met in like this cave, and then they ended up becoming friends. And it's like a really moving movie. I remember watching it as a kid. I don't know what it all was called. You might remember. If you remember, let me know in the comments. And anyways, like over the course of the movie, you see them going from bitter enemies to like really good friends, and they have to survive. And I think they last there for years. And I don't remember what happens at the end, of course, because I was a kid. So sorry for the big open loop there. But this episode reminds me of that movie, of just like the camaraderie and the friendship that comes along through living in this situation together. But in this episode, it's like contrived. Right? Dathan did this on purpose because he was like, we have to get on the same page so that they know, Starfleet knows that we are not enemies. Is there another way they could have done this? Probably. But because their whole culture is about stories, he did it through living a story with Picard. This is the story of Dathan and Picard, which is what they say at the end of the episode, right? And it's really moving at the end because Dathan, spoiler alert, does not make it off the planet. And that's really hard because usually people survive in these episodes, especially if they're main characters. So it's really moving. It's really heartbreaking. My co-host, Andrea, on the TNG podcast, she absolutely loved this. She was like, this is one I will watch again and again, like, because at first she also didn't quite remember it and thought it was dumb. But then after watching it, she was like, this is one I will definitely put on the rewatch list because it was really good. For me, I will not put it on the rewatch list just because I still find it frustrating. Like, I do find it beautiful and heartwarming at the end, but I still find the process frustrating. And like seeing them be frustrating. And because clear communication is so important to me, seeing this muddled communication, it physically pains me. So this is not one that's, I want to watch it every single day or anything, but it is a really good episode. And if you haven't seen it in a while, it's definitely worth revisiting, especially now with maybe more mature eyes in my case. Okay, I'm going to check the ET. It wasn't ET, Justin. It was something else that I can't remember. Was it Enemy Mine? Okay, hold on. I'm getting distracted. I'm going to check the chats, and then we're going to hit the next episode on the list. Let's see. Okay, there's a lot of things going on. Hold on a second. I got to scroll up. Okay, so now going back to Picard's nephew Rene and brother Robert, or Robert, probably. Nadia says, yes, it happens at the beginning of one of the TNG movies, and it puts him in a bit of an existential crisis, unless I'm crazy and remembering wrong. Hold on. I will Google it. And then Nadia follows up with, yes, this happened in Generations. Man, I have not seen Generations in a hot minute. Wingrace says Picard's family burning to death is why Soren saying time is the fire in which we burn hit Picard so hard. Oh, PS2 Chipper again says I haven't watched Generations since I was a teen. Yeah, I haven't watched Generations in a long, long time. However, I agree with you, PS2 Chipper, that I will rewatch First Contact forever and ever. I always rewatch First Contact for First Contact Day, which is April 5th every year. So like at least once a year I'll get a little hit of that. But yeah, I haven't seen Generations in a hot minute. I've only seen it once. Let's see. And then Nadia says, I have not seen any of the movies in years and we'll have to rewatch. Best of luck. Oh, interesting. PS2 Cypher says, I will watch the TOS movies over and over. I think I've seen almost all the movies once, but I've only seen First Contact many, many, many a time. It's such a good movie. It's just so good. I've seen that many, many, many times. And I'm obsessed with the Borg Queen. Okay. So E.T., it was not E.T. It was probably Enemy Mine. It was Enemy Mine. Oh my gosh, Wingrace. How did you do that? From my garbled description of that movie, you pulled out the title and the date. That's nuts. It was that movie. If you have not seen Enemy Mine, it's good. Well, actually, I haven't seen it since I was a little kid. But when I was a little kid, it was really, really good. Whew. Okay, PS2 Cypher says, is that Voyager? Voyager to come back in Picard so badly. It pained me that the supposed AI threat was just some kind of Kurtzman concoction that had no tie to previous lore. Yeah, all of Picard was like not really connected to previous lore. It just was doing its own thing. However, having just finished watching Prodigy is extremely connected to Picard. Like those things are really interwoven. And when I was watching, I was like, why are they? Because like there's a little bit of overlap between temporally, like time-wise, there's overlap between TNG and DS9 and TNG and Voyager as well, right? But TNG and DS9 have a few like overlapping episodes and some like some context that's a little overlapping, but really they're different. You don't see like, they're not doing these big tie-ins to be like, oh, well, back when this happened to Riker, back when this, you know what I mean? Like they're doing something totally separate. So I wonder why Prodigy and Picard were tying in so closely. Like this is happening in this storyline, so we've got to mention it in this storyline. I wonder why. I think it's just kind of weird. The only thing I've seen that does so much connecting is Lower Decks, but it's doing it on purpose. Like it's doing it to be like, to be a joke, right? To be like Easter eggs. So I'm not sure why they did that, but I feel like Picard did feel very out of canon, but it was tied so deeply into Prodigy, and I feel like Prodigy was rooted in canon more with like, you know, going off of what Voyager. I don't know. I feel all kinds of things about it. But I'm just glad we have new Trek, and I'm glad it's bringing in new people. Who was in the movie we're talking about? I will look it up. Oh yeah. So when Grace found it, and I don't know. I just looked the title when I Googled it, and I don't know who was in that movie. Plus, 1985, like, so I watched that movie probably in 1990 or something. I was probably like 5 or 6 when I watched that movie. So I do not know who the actors were at all. PS2 Chipper says, I'm going to binge Lower Decks this weekend. Should I give Prodigy a try as well? What do you think? If you've seen Prodigy, let PS2 Chipper know in the comments what you think. I think so. Prodigy, a couple things I wish I would have known before I binge watched it. One, there's 2 seasons, but there are 40 episodes. Each season has 20 episodes. So this is like old school, back when, you know, like TNG had 26 episodes. But each episode is 20 minutes long, so it's like, you know, you could do it in a weekend. The other thing I wish I had known is that the whole, like, it's a Nickelodeon show. It was a Nickelodeon show. And the whole point was they were trying to pull in kids. So they were really trying to kind of like make sure that the kids were the heroes of every single storyline. So it's always about the kids, or if they go to some other planet, it's the kid on the planet who saves them. Or, you know, if there's a community of people, it's the kid in that community who saves the day or whatever. And so that's cute. but it's also a little, I don't know, a little dumb, right? Because you're like, why are the kids more capable than the adults? You know what I mean? Like it's a little bit like Wesley Crusher nonstop, where you're like, why can't the grown-ups save their own communities? Also, I originally stopped watching after like episode 3 or 4 because the angst was just getting to me. Like the kids were so angsty, and I was just like, I just can't. Like I just can't go back. I used to be a middle school teacher, and like sometimes it's just too much. You know what I mean? Like it's just too much. So I originally stopped watching at like episode 3 or 4 because at the time when I was watching, it was dropping live each week, and so I was like, I don't want to wait next week just to see these kids be angsty every week and be like, oh, can I be in charge? Do I have what it takes? I don't like you. You're mean to me. Like I just didn't have the patience for it. But my cousin kept being like, you gotta watch it. You gotta watch it. You gotta watch it. It gets better. I swear. It's so good. Da, 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 da. So when I went back to watch it, I really had to, like, at first, that first episode, I was like, oh, this is so good. Why did I stop watching? Then I hit episode 3 and I was like, I want to stop watching. I don't want to watch this anymore. But I pushed through and kept watching. And I will say it got better. It wasn't as angsty going forward. And there was only a few episodes where I was just like, big eye roll, where I'm like, this doesn't make any sense for kids to be doing this or in this scenario, but just like go with it and try to enjoy it. So all that to be said, I liked it. There's no rush. It'll be around. And I think it was good, but like, I don't know. I like Lower Decks better just because Lower Decks was made for me, right? It was made for people who watched TNG growing up or TOS growing up. It was made for people who love all these little references. You know what I mean? It wasn't made for kids with like really limited scope in their storyline so that kids won't, whatever they were thinking. I don't know. I don't know if the writers think kids are dummies or something, but the plot lines were trying to be like kind of contained, which I don't think was necessary because like I watched TNG as a kid and I could understand not Darmok, but I could understand most of what was going on. So anyways, Nadia says, I have not watched Prodigy. And Nadia, you haven't watched Lower Decks either, right? Oh, you said I still need to watch season 5. I will say, I'll get on this in the new year. I will say season 5 of Lower Decks is not as good to me as season 4 was. So just a heads up. If you really enjoyed season 4, season 5 is kind of like, it's not as good. It's fine. Like, it's not bad. But when I add like halfway through season 5, I was like, I kind of want to go back and rewatch season 4 because it just was like, I think a stronger season. Let's see. Yeah, PS2 Chipper says Lower Decks didn't find its feel until season 2. Exactly. And Prodigy only got 2 seasons. So like maybe it's still finding its feet. But I think season 2 was really good and really strong. So who knows what would have happened if it had gotten a season 3. PS2 Chipper says there's one episode of DS9 that shows the consequences of teens running a starship. Oh, I'm so curious. Nadia says that's right. That episode was so good. It makes me cry. Okay, so my goal, like Nadia, you have a goal of watching Lower Decks and maybe Prodigy this year. My goal is to watch Deep Space Nine because I've seen some of it. But I'm co-hosting a podcast called Trek, Marry, Kill, which is all about Star Trek, and they rate each episode. It's really fun. Highly recommend you check it out if you're into podcasts. And so the last few episodes we've been going over are all Deep Space Nine episodes, and they're some of the best DS9 episodes. And so I don't have a lot of the context for them because I haven't been watching all the seasons, but just these episodes alone, I'm like, oh, these are so good. Like, I'm so excited about watching this show. So at some point, when we come back, I will know what you guys are talking about. Okay, let's hit the next episode on the list.
Season 6, Episode 20, The Chase. Picard joins a race to solve an ancient genetic puzzle left by a precursor species. Facing competition and interference from Klingons, Romulans, and the Cardassians, the Enterprise discovers that humanoid species share a common origin. This news is met with a variety of responses, from indignation to awe.
So one of my responses was indignation. When I got to the end of this episode, I was like, what? They did all of this. The Klingons, and I think it was the Klingons and maybe also the Cardassians, were just like bombing entire planets and getting rid of their whole biosphere, like killing every living thing on the planet so that the other competitors couldn't get a strand of the DNA to make this map. And at the end of the day, after all of this destruction and violence, we find out that it's this kumbaya moment of we are all one and you are all me. And so I was very indignant at the end of this episode. I don't like this episode for that reason. Like, the whole episode is probably fine, but the ending for me was so upsetting because I felt like it was just a waste. Like all of this destruction for a message that's just saying, hey, FYI, you guys share some common ancestor. So that's why you all look kind of similar. And it's like, let's all be friends. I don't know. I just felt like, what was the point of that? And of course, at the end, there's supposed to be some message of hope. I get there's supposed to be a moral of the story because at the end, Picard is in his ready room and he messages the Romulan captain or whatever Romulan captains are called. And that guy, he messages him or that guy messages him. I don't know which one does the message first, but they say something where they're like, well, maybe someday we can be friends, or maybe someday we can, we can bury the hatchet on all of this conflict, because after all, we do have this common ancestor. So we do have more things in common than differences. And that's supposed to be the moral of the story. But I feel like, I don't know. I didn't feel soothed. However, that being said, that is my personal opinion. My co-host on the TNG podcast had the totally opposite reaction. She loved this episode. She thought it was so fun. She loved the adventure and the chase and the mystery. Seeing all the aliens like compete, but then all the aliens work together. And then in the end, finding out this message that they all have something in common, which actually makes sense because we see most of the aliens on the show are humanoid, right? They have 2 legs, they have 2 arms, they have eyes that face forward, their bodies are upright, etc. Now, this is obviously done for logistical reasons because all of these aliens are played by human actors. So there are limitations with that. Even if you're going to do prosthetics and stuff, there's just limitations. If you're going to do something that looks like a giant squid or whatever, you're probably going to have to use CGI, right? Or if you want something that looks like a giant cricket, which we did see in Lower Decks, you're going to need animation or CGI or something, because a humanoid person, like that costume would just be so cumbersome and difficult. And when they did try to do some stuff out of the box, like the fish people or like the creatures, the Cele and the Antikins, or the shape-shifting creatures in the Dauphin, like it goes off the rails. When they try to do something a little bit, not so humanoid, it really goes off the rails. So this is supposed to be the explanation for that. Like, oh, this is really why all the aliens look the same. It's not because we're using human actors all the time, but it's because we all share common DNA. For me, as a scientist, I'm kind of like, okay. I don't know. For some reason, that just wasn't like so mind-blowing to me. However, the idea that this progenitor alien says about the fact that, and I forget why they did this, but the fact that they took their genetic material and like sprayed it all across the galaxy to share themselves or whatever, that was weird. Again, that to me was weird. I was like, okay, because why? Because you just wanted like more of you, or you like, I don't understand. And then presumably now this progenitor species is long gone. Like maybe they all died out hundreds of thousands of years ago, but their ancestors have evolved and developed using their genetic material, and now they live in this galaxy, and hopefully they're all friends, I think was the message. So all over, like, I didn't love this episode. However, Andrea loved it. So, let me know in the chat. Did you love this episode or did you not love this episode? No wrong answers, by the way. Just because it's not my favorite doesn't mean it's not a good episode. And maybe if the episode had ended differently, I would feel differently. Because I definitely am one of those kind of people that I will judge the entire movie based on the ending and how satisfying it was. So it could be the most epic movie you've ever seen in your life, but if the ending is really stupid and unsatisfying, I will say I hate the entire movie, because I do. Because now I feel like robbed and ripped off of all my time and emotional investment. So I don't think that's fair, because I'm discounting literally everything that went ahead of it. However, that is my way. So it's quite possible that this is a fantastic episode that I just can't appreciate because the ending just does not fill me with awe. However, I will say the entire last season of Discovery, season 5, is all about the chase, and it is all about this progenitor species, and it's all about the technology they use to spread their DNA. And so we get to revisit a lot of these themes. I was not super pumped about that. I was like, oh, great. Now we get to do this again, but for a whole nother 10 episodes. However, they did add a lot more context and nuance to the entire conversation through those episodes. So yay. I'm glad they had the chase so that they had this material to work with in Discovery season 5. Okay, I'm going to check the chat, and then we're going to go to the next episode on the list. Hold on. PS2 Chipper says, shut up, Wesley, and I don't know why. Oh, yeah, Dennis Quaid. Yes, Dennis Quaid was in that movie, Enemy Mine. You're so right. Okay, Nadia has to watch Disco season 5. So hopefully I didn't ruin it for you because I also see you saying no spoilers. Yeah, it's just that's just the theme of season 5 is like the chase and like the like this episode. It's like the sequel to this episode, but it's 10 episodes that are the sequel to this episode. Like, what does it mean based off of this? So, I don't think that's a spoiler at all because they say it in the very first episode, and you just get to like enjoy the ride of like what happens next. Nadia says, "I love the chase. I felt like it explained so much, which it really does." PS2 Chipper says, "I like the episode. Just the ending didn't have any follow up." Which, of course, it does now in season 5 of Discovery. Nadia says the person at the end of the chase was the intergalactic mitochondrial Eve. Yes, or at least the representative of the intergalactic mitochondrial Eve, right? Because, like, who knows who exactly spread the genetic material or how it was spread. There's some questions, but the big picture was we're all one. Oh, yep, you're right. You're totally right, Wingrace. This is why they did it. This is part of that ending speech that I don't love. Wingrace says, I think they said that they were the only intelligent life and that they were lonely. So they wanted the galaxy to be full of something. Be full or something like that. I think that's exactly what she said. She was like, it's just us and like there should be more. And so they spread all their material, but then died, I guess. And hundreds of thousands of years later, now it's full. It's not just them. So thanks, friends. PS2 Chipper says, I will send you a link to an STO YouTuber that made a series out of the game. Oh, and I will love him because he is British. I see no flaws in that logic. Okay, so now let's hit the next episode on the list.
Season 6, Episode 11, Chain of Command, Part 2. Picard is captured by the Cardassians and tortured by Gul Madrid, who seeks information about Federation defenses. Picard resists both physical and mental assaults until he's rescued by Captain Jellicoe's unique negotiation tactics.
This episode, again, is one of the best TNG episodes, in my opinion. It's hard for me to say, like, good in the sense that you feel good because you don't feel good. You feel like crap because the whole episode is Picard being tortured and it's awful, but it is so well done and it is a powerfully told story. And Gul Madrid, who is the torturer, the Cardassian who's a menace, is terrifying. And I don't even think they say his name the entire episode. So like when you Google this, people are like, oh, it's Gul Madrid. But I don't think they actually say Gul Madrid at any point in the either this episode or the episode before. This again is kind of similar to Best of Both Worlds, where Picard is being tortured in a way that should change who he is forever. Now, Best of Both Worlds obviously does, because there's lots of follow-ups to that storyline. There's really no follow-ups to this storyline whatsoever. Like, we don't see how this affects Picard in the long run. It's just like a typical episode where whatever happened to the characters during an episode, by the end, you hit the big reset button and they're all fine by the next time. You know, they have a quick chat with Troy and they're good. They do some tapping and they're good. This episode, he does sit on the couch with Troy in his ready room and tell her about his experiences and what happened and how he's feeling. And one of the things he says that's so powerful, and I think just really sums it up, is that he's talking to her and he says, Gul Madrid wanted me to say that there were 5 lights when there were only 4, but I wouldn't say it. And then he says, but the worst part is at the end, I actually saw 5 lights. So it's like, what? And at the end, you know, there's a scene where he's like, there are 4 lights. There's only 4 lights. And he's screaming it. But it's like crazy to think that at that moment, he was actually seeing 5. Like the torture had brainwashed him so much that I don't even know how to describe it. Did he believe what Gul Madrid was saying? Did he just want to believe? Did he just want the torture to end? But despite that, he didn't give in to the torture, which is incredible and awful. And also we see Captain Jellicoe, who is like the best, worst boss when it comes to captaining a starship. In this scenario, he is the perfect man for the job. In general, though, he's not the perfect person for the Enterprise because this crew is used to a more collaborative, diplomatic atmosphere. And Jellicoe is definitely more of a dictator. However, I will say, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but I won't give any specifics, Captain Jellicoe does show up again in Prodigy. And I was like, Captain Jellicoe of all people, you brought this mofo back? But it was kind of cool to see him also, which I was surprised by because Captain Jellicoe is not my favorite, but seeing him in Prodigy, I was like, I know that guy. Something about that was actually kind of cool. And also good to see, like, okay, there's a place for him in Starfleet, just like there's a place for a Picard. Everybody's not a Picard. Everyone's not a Jellicoe. And I think that's important to have that just kind of diversity in leadership because you need the right tool for the job. Sometimes you need a hammer. Sometimes you need a saw. You know what I mean? This episode is incredible. Like I said, one of the best. It's part 2. Part 1 is also the backstory and the buildup, but I think part 1 is good also because you get to see Worf and Beverly and Picard in the holodeck, like climbing rocks and in their like spy outfits and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of fun stuff that happens in that first episode, but obviously episode 2 is where you get all the big action. And there's a scene in that episode, which is like my favorite Riker scene of all time, where Jellicoe comes to Riker and he needs his help to plant these explosive charges on the Cardassian ship to force the Cardassians to get Picard back. And he's going around asking everybody on the ship, like, I need the best pilot to plant these bombs. And every single person he asks goes like, I could do it, but you really need Riker. I might be able to do it, but you really need Riker. The person you need to ask is Riker. But he's already dismissed Riker because Riker called him on his leadership style and how it's like not cool or whatever. And so he was dismissed. He was like sent to his quarters. He was sent to his quarters without dinner. And so then Jellicoe comes with his like hat in his hand to Riker and is like, we need a pilot. We need somebody to do this mission, blah, 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 blah. And then Riker's like, uh-huh. And then Jellicoe goes, well, I can't order you to do it because it's like, you know, not right or whatever. Like for some reason it can't be an order. But he's like, I can't order you to do it. And Riker goes, then ask me. And Jellicoe's like, will you pilot this mission? Like you can see it's just killing him to be polite to Riker. And Riker's like, yes. And then he's like, thank you or whatever. I don't even think he says thank you. I think he just walks out and Riker's like, you're welcome. And Jellicoe like pauses at the door all irritated and storms off. And right before that, Riker gives him like a whole, like he dresses him down because Jellicoe's like, Riker, I don't think you're a good first officer. You're this, you're that, you're this other thing. And then Riker's like, well, I don't think you're a good captain. You're this, you're that, and you're the other thing. And it's just like, it's my favorite scene. Sometimes I watch sometimes I watch that episode just for that scene. And sometimes I just watch that scene because the whole episode is so painful, right? Watching Picard get tortured is just, it's so hard to watch. So sometimes I'll just only watch that scene in that episode and then I'll go to the next episode so I can like enjoy my favorite part without the trauma. Anyways, I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to hit the next episode on the list. Nadia says, my sister was messing with my mind this past week. So every time she brought up this topic, I started yelling, there are 4 lights. Of course, it was only funny to me because she has never watched TNG. My favorite part of this, Nadia, is that you're yelling like Star Trek quotes at somebody who's never seen the show. I think that's hilarious. But I hope it made you feel empowered. Thank you, PS2 Chipper, that you sent the link. PS2 Chipper says, if you believe it is not a lie, but does that make it the truth? I think that's an interesting statement because there's objective reality and then there's subjective reality, right? There's things like gravity, where if you believe in it or not, if you miss a step, you're going to fall, right? Like there's things like that, but then there's like how you interpret a situation, which is so different from person to person and could still be true though, right? Nadia says, yeah, my sister's reaction was like, what the heck? What do lights have to do with it? Because our argument was about the color of license plates. I'm picturing you and your sister who I've never seen, and you're arguing about license plate colors, and you just turn around and you go, there are 4 lights. And she's like, what? You feeling okay? Okay, let's hit the next episode on the list.
Season 6, Episode 18, Starship Mine. While the Enterprise undergoes a baryon sweep, Picard discovers mercenaries attempting to steal dangerous trilithium resin from the ship. Picard booby traps the ship and neutralizes the intruders. This is basically Home Alone in space. Meanwhile, the crew is being held hostage at the most awkward brunch in the galaxy.
This is one of my favorite episodes of all time. it is, and this is also like the genre for me is actiony. But this episode is so much fun. Both plots are great. The A plot and the B plot, which kind of weave in together. The crew is supposed to be going to this like reception or something that's being hosted by Hutchinson, who I don't even know who he is or why they're going or what the context is. But I do know that Data is trying to learn how to do small talk. And Captain Picard is like, wait till you meet Hutch. He is a masterclass in and of himself. And Data's like, okay, cool. And so there's this scene where they're at the reception and who is Hutch? I think Hutch is talking to Riker. And you see there's a pole between the two of them. So there's like Hutch, there's Riker, there's a pole. And then behind the pole is Data. And he's staring at them and he's copying all of Hutch's body movements so he can understand like how to do small talk properly. And it's hilarious. And then later on when Data is talking to Hutch is like, were you aware that blah, 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 blah. And Data's like, I was aware, but were you aware? And they're just like matching. And so they're talking gallons and gallons, oceans of words with like an ounce of meaning. And Riker and Troy are behind this pole again, and they're watching them and they're just like, this is insane. It's like the small talk Olympics, right? They're just watching, like they've been going at it for hours and like there's no stopping in sight, which is just a really fun side story, like a side quest for them. But also the mercenaries who are trying to rob the trilithium from the Enterprise D also have teammates who are at the reception and they are dressed as waiters. So when their plan goes into place, actually before their plan goes into place fully, Geordi is able to see that they've got some kind of jamming signal or something hidden under the table, something he can see with his visor. And so he's like, wait, what's this? And then the bad guys know that the jig is up. So they pull out their weapons. They start firing. Rest in peace, Hutch. They totally kill him, which is totally unnecessary. They could just put it on stun. Nobody's going anywhere. It looks like nobody brought weapons to this reception anyways. But whatever. They start blasting people. And they're like, everybody needs to stay here until we're done. And so it's their job to kind of hold down the fort and keep everybody at this reception because there's a deadly baryon sweep going on the ship. So what was supposed to happen was everyone's at this reception. The baryon sweep goes through. The mercenaries get what they want. They get in, they get out. They make a ton of money. And then when the crew comes back to the ship, they're none the wiser. So that was their big master plan, which goes horribly wrong. And we get to see Captain Picard doing this like diehard level of just like acrobatics and climbing through Jeffrey's tubes and Vulcan neck pitching Tuvok before he was Tuvok and, blowing stuff up. And it's just, this episode is really, really good. It is one of my all-time favorites. And in the TNG podcast, we reviewed this episode. Andre and I reviewed this episode with a friend who was a listener, a longtime listener. And we're like, come do an episode or two with us. And his name's Jeffrey. And this was like such the fun level we had in talking about this episode was so much higher. It just really enriched my love and joy for this episode. And at the time of this recording, our friend Jeffrey had sadly passed away like last month, 2 months ago. He passed away. He's only 41, like a young man. But we met him because of his love for Star Trek and because of his love for our show. And he was just such a light and such a delight and just brought so much joy into my life. And so I really just, every time I watch this episode now, not only do I love it because it's amazing, but I also now think of Jeffrey and what a blessing he was in my life just to know him. And it just feels like, I don't know, it feels like he's there, now when I watch, and he was a big Star Trek everything person, but when I watch the episodes that we reviewed together, it's just like, oh, like I just, I miss you, my friend, but I'm also so happy that I got a chance to know you. So that's like on a personal note, another reason why I just love this episode. Okay, so I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to hit the next episode on the list. By the way, if you haven't watched Starship Mine recently, highly recommend watching it again. Like, it's so good. It's so worth it. You're going to enjoy it. However Chain of Command makes you feel, like however crummy and down and like the world is a terrible place that Chain of Command might make you feel, Starship Mine is like the opposite. It's like, there are heroes and you can fight the bad guys and you can fight the darkness and you can still win. And it's really, really good. Okay, Nadia says yes to Starship Mine. Coincidentally, I watched Die Hard again today. So what are the odds? PSG Chipper says yes, the Vulcan neck pinch opened a can of worms. if it was a psychic move or a physical move or how a human or a machine like Data could perform the technique, I just always assumed anybody could perform it. And maybe that's because of me watching Spaceballs, where like there's a scene where one of the characters is trying to Vulcan neck pinch another one of the characters. Like he's trying to Vulcan neck pinch a guard. And the guard's like, what are you doing? And he goes, the Vulcan neck pinch. And he's like, the Vulcan neck pinch is not right there. It's a little bit higher, like by the carotid artery. And he's like, oh, you mean like this? And he's like, yes. And then he collapses. So ever since that movie, I just assumed anyone could do it. It's just a matter of technique. Right? Nadia says Spaceballs, Blast from the Past, and so funny. You know, I watched Spaceballs before I ever watched Star Wars. And I'm really glad I did. I also watched, what is it called? I also watched Robin Hood Men in Tights long before I ever watched whatever the real movie is. Robin Hood, maybe? I think it's a Kevin Costner movie. Whatever like the serious version of that movie is, I watched the silly version first. And again, I'm so glad I did. I missed a lot of the in-jokes, of course, because I watched them backwards. But then when I watched the funny ones again afterwards, I just loved it even more. And you know, I'm a big fan of like just loving things more than I loved them before. Exactly. Mel Brooks, baby. That's right. Oh, yes. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Yes. I was like, I don't remember what it's called. Probably Robin Hood. Because I've only seen that movie once, but I've watched Robin Hood Men in Tights like 300 times. Okay. So let's hit the next episode on the list.
Season 7, Episode 19, Genesis. The crew of the Enterprise starts to devolve into primitive forms. Picard and Data, unaffected by the changes, work to reverse the mutation while running for their lives from what's left of the crew. Data saves the day in time for Picard to avoid being eaten by Worf.
This is another one of my favorite episodes of all time. This is a Picard and Data episode because they are the only two people not affected by this de-evolution virus. They were like on an away mission doing something. And so they weren't infected when it was spreading through the ship. But now that they're back, Data is immune. He can't be infected, but Picard does get infected. And apparently it takes a few hours before it kicks in, or maybe it takes a full day or whatever. There's some time lapse. So at first Picard's like, cool, I'm good. But then as the episode goes on, you see Picard start to change and get more nervous and get more afraid. And Data scans him at some point and goes, I'm sorry, sir, you've been infected and you're devolving to some kind of, what did he say? Like some kind of mammal. I think he said some kind of marsupial, like a meerkat or something. If you remember what he said, let me know in the chat. I don't remember what exact animal it was, but it was something like that. Like he was devolving into like a mouse or something very small and scared of bigger predators. Enter bigger predators, which is Worf being this proto-Klingon monstrosity who is terrifying. Like this episode is so great. Like the special effects are nuts. They're wild. The prosthetics are so good. And I often wonder in moments like this, I know Michael Dorn, the actor who plays Worf, he was in all that makeup for the big monster Worf, but like he doesn't need to be because you can't even see his face. The same thing with the actor who plays Barclay, who was in that like half spider makeup. That was the actor in that makeup. But like, did it need to be him? Because you can't see him. Couldn't it have been literally anyone in that makeup? But the fact that they went that extra mile, I think, is really special. They did the same thing for Geordi in what was that episode? Okay, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it'll come to me. The episode when he turned into that glow-in-the-dark invisible alien, like that was LeVar Burton, the actor who plays Geordi, in all of that makeup. So much makeup that you could not tell who it was. So it could have been literally anyone in the makeup, but it was him. They used the actual actor, which I think is just, I don't know, there's that touch of realism, which I really appreciate. But then also just logistically, I kind of always like, but did they need to though? Couldn't that have just been like a stunt double? I don't know. I'm not mad at it because it was glorious. This episode's great. And anyways, the reason why it's on this list is because it's a freaking great episode. And because we see Picard's ability to problem solve in a crisis in a unique way. We see Picard's problem solving ability in almost every episode because that's his zone of genius. But in this case, he's trying to solve this mystery along with Data while at the same time devolving into some kind of primate or some kind of mammal, who's like running for his life. And there's a few key scenes in this episode that it's like, I don't think I would be able to keep my head on straight. When they first get to the ship, all the lights are off and there's nobody around and they just hear like growling and mewing and stuff like that in the hallways, which no, thank you. already I'm good. I'm good with this whole ship. Let's just call Starfleet in, let them decontaminate or something. Again, like maybe we shouldn't have kids on the ship for moments like this, but like I'm good. I'd be back on that shuttle so fast. But they pick up this huge, like human-sized snakeskin, and they're like, something has shed. Again, I'm out. They go to the bridge, and the guy who's sitting at where Data usually sits, it's not the comms, it's whatever the heck Data does. He's sitting there like at the comms, and he's got like huge slices through his chest, and he's dead. Something mauled him, didn't eat him, just mauled him, and then just like went along its way to go and maul the rest of the people on the ship, I suppose. And I had this thought when we reviewed this for the TNG podcast, how many crew members were lost on this day? How many crew members were like eaten or like mauled or punctured or, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I just feel like this is like a day of mourning, whatever happened on this ship. So anyways, my point is they're going to the ship and they're seeing these things. They're seeing the giant snakeskin. They're hearing the growling in the hallway. They see the dead guy on the bridge. And then they go into, I think, the ready room, and Riker's in there as like a caveman. And he attacks them because he doesn't understand what they're saying, but he just knows that they're moving and they're making him angry. So he attacks them. So they're like, that's Riker, but it doesn't look like Riker. And why did Riker just try to kill me? And like all of these things are a big no thank you. Let's go ahead and get off this ship moment. All of those things. But in the midst of all of this craziness, Picard is like, we've got to figure this out. We've got to solve this. We've got to save the crew. Data's also thinking like that, but it's Data. Data's not afraid of any of this. He's just like, how interesting. You know, it's just information coming through his processors. And it's a very strange situation, but he's not devolving, thankfully. There's nothing for him to devolve into. What's he going to turn into, a computer chip? And also, he is not afraid because he doesn't have the emotions chip in. So he's not afraid of the situation. He's just facing it head on, which is like, I don't know what this episode would have been if it was just Picard. But me in this scenario, I don't think I could have kept my head on to be like, let's come up with a solution. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's get Nurse Agawa in here because she's probably the solution. You know, like, it's just amazing to me. And I like that they show them doing this while Picard's slowly deteriorating. And they just add that level of realism. Great episode. Cannot say enough about it. Love, love, love. If you haven't seen Genesis in a while, I highly recommend. It is referenced in the last season of Lower Decks. Okay, but literally everything is referenced in Lower Decks. So that doesn't really mean anything. That's not telling you much. Everything gets referenced in Lower Decks at some point because that's what the whole show is about. But yeah, Genesis itself was referenced. And it was like, oh my gosh, you know, like all those moments that's why I love the show Lower Decks, because there's so many moments of me being like, oh, I remember that. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then hit the next episode on the list. Okay, Wingrace says it was a lemur. That sounds right. I think I said meerkat or something. I think it was a lemur. Something really cute. Something cute and furry and small and definitely edible by Worf for sure. Yes, Nadia says we're men, manly men, we're men in tights. Yes. I love that song. I love all the songs. I know all the songs. I'm going to find that movie on streaming after this so I can just relive it. Nadia says, okay, sound off. What would you devolve to if you had the virus? I would probably be a horse. What I love about this question and what I love even more about this answer is, so scientifically speaking, there is like an origin of life, right? There's like a tree of life, similar to what the progenitor species were doing, spraying their genetic material, and then everything kind of evolves with similar genetic material. It's the same kind of thing with all living things. There's like commonalities. And so you can actually see a tree based on how closely related DNA markers are to other animals, to other living things, not just animals, because plants as well, bacteria, stuff like that, viruses as well. And the way that the tree branches is that different types of life forms are on totally different branches, even though it's the same tree of life. So like the branch that has amoeba, for example, is not the same branch that has humans, or the branch that has birds is not the same branch that has whales. So you can go back to some kind of common ancestor that shared a lot of common DNA between those two things. But like a whale is not going to turn into a bird, right? Like if they devolve. So that's the one thing they did get wrong in this episode, is that these people were just mutating into random things that were not in their DNA and they could not be. However, Who cares? This episode was great. And I love the way that they did it. I love the way that they did it. Otherwise, we'd have every single humanoid from Earth would just become like a primate or like a caveman. And like, okay, we saw both of those, and I felt happy with that. We saw Nurse Ogawa become a primate. We saw Riker become a caveman. I'm happy with that. I feel satisfied. Now I want other things, and that's exactly what they did for Barclay to become a giant spider. Who thought of that? That was genius. They're taking creepy things from Earth, but then to make Worf this proto-Klingon, so that's not like a regular Earth thing that we would see, but it's something terrifying. And then to make Troy like some kind of amphibian, which makes sense. Like, I just love the thought of this. So with that question of like, what would you devolve into? And the answer of like, well, I'd be a horse. I love that. I love the idea of like, okay, if I could just mutate into another animal, or I guess another life form, because you could also be like a ficus plant if you wanted to. What would you be? Like, what would you evolve into? And I love the fact that you picked a horse, because I would have never thought of that. And now I'm thinking of horses running around on the Enterprise D, and like how fun that would be just to see that, just to be like, was that a horse that just went past 10 forward? That'd be nuts. Wingrace says a Finnick fox. What does Finnick mean? Does it mean like from Finland? Nope, because that would be with an I. What's a Finnick? I'll have to Google that. Okay, a fox. Nadia says, I'll have to look that up. Hey, me too. And apparently, whatever it is really cute. PS2 Chipper says, I would evolve into a pig. Why? That's kind of random. My cousin has a pet pig that she adores. So I'm just like picturing this like really loved and just like cuddled little pig right now. Nadia says, nice. Pigs are super smart, and they are allowed to eat as much as they want, which is hashtag the dream. Wingrace says, Star Trek uses Animorph rules, which we love that. We love that for Star Trek, because that's what makes it fun and interesting. Like, that's what makes it interesting. Take something that is based on some kind of reality, but then make it fantastic. Make it bigger, make it more. And that's what makes it interesting. Nadia says, I picked a horse because I work hard and I used to be able to run forever and I have really long legs. All those reasons totally make sense. I'm not mad that you picked a horse. I think it's a great option. PS2 Cypher says, I used to have pet pigs. Okay, so that makes sense. Gosh, what would I be? I think I would be a bird, because flying seems awesome. I would want to be like a bird of prey, though, so that other creatures won't mess with me, like a falcon or a hawk or something like that, so that other creatures back off when I show up. Okay, that shows you something about my psychology. Let's hit the next episode on the list.
Season 7, episodes 25 and 26, All Good Things. Picard is transported across 3 timelines by Q to solve the mystery of a temporal anomaly threatening humanity's existence. Piecing together clues from the past, present, and future, Picard discovers that his decisions are key to solving this crisis. Turns out, Q can actually be helpful sometimes. Also, Picard joins the Bridge Crew poker game for the first time.
So these are 2 great episodes / 1 great episode, depending on how it's put together and what you're streaming, or if you have the VHSs or the DVDs for the show. But in any case, All Good Things is a good episode. It's a really good show finale, because it introduces this problem that has to be solved by the end of the episode, which is what episodics do. But it also creates this flash forward so we can see what happens to these characters, because we know this is the end of their story. At least at this point, we think this is the end of their story, because we didn't know about all the movies that are going to come out at this point, right, as viewers. So this is the end of their story, but we get to see what their story could have looked like 20 years from now. And then when the problem is resolved and we see this final poker game, Picard makes this kind of, I think he has like a heart-to-heart with Q or something. And he decides like, he does not want to see the divisions that happened in his 20-year flash forward, like particularly between Riker and Worf, who hate each other because Riker hooked up with Troy and Troy died? ? I don't totally remember the details. I rarely rewatch All Good Things. Like when I get close to All Good Things, I just start my watch party all the way over from the beginning. I don't like to finish the show. I like to just like keep it going forever. So I've only seen All Good Things probably like twice, 2 or 3 times. But I think that's what happened, is that Worf hooked up with Troy and then Troy died and then Riker blamed Worf or something. And anyways, they weren't friends. They were enemies. And in the like flash forward future, in the alternate future. So when Picard goes back to regular time, he's like, I want to make this right, and I want to make sure that they're friends, and so I want to tell them everything that happened so that way they don't, that doesn't happen. And then also in the alternate reality, he and Beverly are divorced. So apparently at some point they decide to get married, but then that doesn't last, which is a bummer because like they've been spending all this time with this will he won't he energy, and then they get married and then they get divorced. So whatever. I remember as a viewer being really irritated by that. I was like, all we've ever wanted to see is these two characters get together. So not only do we not see them get together, but we see that even after they did get together, they got divorced. And I felt like that was like a kick in the teeth to viewers like me who were like on team Beverly and Picard. But regardless, whatever. We see that. So presumably something changes in his mind as well about how he's going to be around Beverly to prevent that from happening, whether to prevent the marriage or prevent the divorce, who knows what. Also, what's nice about this episode is that we see Q in the garb that he was wearing in Encounter in Farpoint, which is the show pilot. And basically he's like, the trial against humanity has never ended, or whatever. So it's a nice bookend because it's like what started this whole adventure off with Q being like, humanity's on trial because you suck. We also see Q at the end being like, humanity's okay. They don't suck so hard, and like that was kind of a nice little ending. And then we also do get to see Q again in Picard season 2. So we do get more. He doesn't wear this garb and he doesn't do the humanity on trial. He's just there for Picard, which, let's be real, he was always just there for Picard. Even though he said humanity's on trial, it was always just Picard that he was interested in. But yeah, this episode or these two episodes are really good. And they are Picard episodes. Even though we're seeing what happens to all these other characters, they are about Picard and his choices and his relationships and the crews he's had over time and the kind of person he becomes. In these two episodes, he ends up with some form of dementia or something. I forget what they called it, but I think they actually bring it up again in Picard. Erasini syndrome or something? I don't know. He has some kind of thing. And so when he shows up in the future and he's like, the world's going to end and people are just like, oh, well, that's part of his condition or part of his disease or whatever. But it's not. It's part of him time traveling, which nobody believes because it's mixed in with all his other erratic behaviors. But we even see like that ending is really tragic for a person like Picard, right? Someone who's so in charge of things, so in control of their faculties, to kind of lose their minds is really heartbreaking. And I think anytime anybody has a degenerative condition where they lose their minds, that they lose themselves. And I think that's always really heartbreaking. But to see it with Captain Picard and how everybody treats him, like they still have respect for him, but they don't believe him. And Beverly keeps hypospraying him because he keeps getting out of control. It's really interesting. It's a good way to end things because you see where things could have gone and they bring you back to like happy times of them playing poker together, which is just a beautiful moment. Okay, I do have one honorable mention, but before that, I want to check the chat, and then we will go to the technically last episode on the list since we got an honorable mention. Anyone here who does not know what a VHS is now dead to me. Oh my goodness. Do you remember when Back to the Future came out? And I think it might have been Back to the Future 1 or it might have been Back to the Future 2, where like there's this like, I think it's Back to the Future 1. There's like a pile of DVDs or something and they're like all in the trash. And it's like, wow, can you imagine a day when there aren't DVDs and CDs? That'd be crazy. What kind of world would that be? And nowadays, like on this laptop I'm using right now, there is no CD-ROM drive, no DVD player, no place to put a disc whatsoever. It's crazy. Okay, so here's my one honorable mention in the list of just totally memorable Captain Picard moments. Season 5, Episode 25, The Inner Light. A mysterious probe latches onto Captain Picard and transports him to the planet Catan. There he lives an entire lifetime and watches helplessly as his planet slowly dies. Eventually, he is reunited with the family and friends that he's lost along the way, as they tell him that all of this was an elaborate simulation to help preserve the memory of their culture. He awakes on the bridge about 25 minutes after the probe was activated, and the only thing remaining, other than his memories, is a Resican flute. This episode is a fan favorite. It's one of the most popular episodes of all in TNG, and TNG is one of the most popular Star Trek show like series for all of Star Trek, like people who aren't even Trekkies, they will know Kirk and Picard. Like they will know that, even if they don't know anything else about anything with Star Trek. If they have ever seen anything, they've probably seen TNG. This is one of the most, if not the most popular episode. So it had to go on the list because it was a Picard focused episode. But the reason it's an honorable mention is the same reason why in future Best of Both Worlds Part 2 is going to be an honorable mention. Because this episode, though Picard was the center focus, was not about Captain Picard at all. It was about the character that Captain Picard was playing, the life of this other person that he was living. And while it's a wonderful episode, we don't get to see Captain Picard being Captain Picard. We don't get to see him in his diplomacy or in his like diehard action figure mode either. We're seeing him live out his life as someone else. And in the beginning, he knows who he is. He's like, I'm Captain Picard and who's kidnapped me, right? So like there's a lot of nobody believes you, you're crazy and all of that in the beginning until he finally settles in and says, okay, this is my life. This is my wife. We have a kid, you know, like, and lives out an entire life. And then for at the end of that, for that to be taken away from him as an old man, where they're like, psych, this was all fake. You really are a captain. You know, it's just kind of like, what the heck, dude? So great episode, super great episode. But yeah, definitely not Picard being Picard, you know? So we don't get to see what makes him a great character. However, this is a great episode. Yes, like Nadia says, Inner Light messes with me because I don't understand how he could recover so quickly and easily from basically living 25 years in 25 minutes, having a family, witnessing the end of his world, etc. And having a family, like he's married when he wakes up. I don't know if they have a kid yet, but they end up having a kid and their kid has kids. So he's got like a whole family. He's got a whole community. He serves on like the town council or whatever. So he's got a whole community he's in charge of. His wife actually dies before him. And at the end, when he's an old man, he's got like his granddaughter or whatever. And like they find out that their primary star is about to go supernova. So their son's about to die. So the planet's about to die. And now he's going to lose everything. Whatever else he has left, he's going to lose everything. And then they're just like, psych, that was all just like memories of us. You're good. You can go back to your own world. And yes, it's very traumatic and shocking. And I believe, let me know if I'm wrong in this, but I believe in this episode, the device that activated scanned Picard's brain, sent him through this really elaborate simulation experience, whatever. And then I think it like deactivated and just dropped off the flute, which means like nobody else can access those memories or like it's a one-shot deal or something. I don't know. I have to rewatch it, but like the episode's so sad. I don't like rewatching it too often. I'll have to rewatch to get the details, but I don't think this thing was like reusable. Like I think it was like a one-shot thing where it just happened to come into contact with the ship and just happened to scan Picard and happened to download all the memories into his experiences. But like, I don't know if it was really doing what they meant for it to do, which was to let their story live on. Their story does live on in Picard, and Picard did write a report because it doesn't say Starfleet unless it's a report. So he did write a report so other people can know like what he experienced from his perspective. But I don't think that device was working anymore for people to actually experience it again, which I don't think it was right for them to like force it on Picard. He didn't ask for this, but if they could have done it in such a way where people could access it and they could live through this life, like they could choose to, as a living memorial, experience this, I think that'd be a totally different thing. And I think that would honor the culture more than putting it in this time capsule that is kind of like a, it's kind of like, it's a time capsule that's also like a time bomb, right? Like it keeps all their memories, but once it's out and it's done and no one else can access them. So I don't know. They revisit this idea in an episode of Voyager, which the name I'm totally blanking on. I keep saying it'll come to me, and it will. As soon as I turn off the camera, I'm going to remember the names of all these episodes and movies. But there's an episode where a bunch of the crew starts getting traumatized with all these memories of these war crimes that they've committed and all these atrocities they've committed. But they're like, but I didn't commit those, but I have vivid memories of it. And it turns out that it was a device that had stored people's memories, but it was failing because it was like 300 years old or something like that. And so the device was sending out memories in fragments, and it wasn't a complete story, and it was, traumatizing everybody. And so they fixed it. They powered it up so that people could experience the memories in chronological order. And then Voyager also put some warning buoys in the system so anyone coming to the system would know what to expect. It was like, hey, just so you know, on this one planet, there's this living memorial. And if you go there, you will experience what these people experienced. So just so you know, again, it's kind of like that part of consent, which was not here in Inner Light and was not in that episode either. That gives people the opportunity to be like, I want to know what they experience, and you can actually experience it. I will tell you right now, I'm not raising my hand for that. I don't want to know somebody's horrible traumatic experience. I have my own. Like, I don't want to experience it from their viewpoint, feeling those feelings, crawling under the rocks, dodging firefights, like all of this. I don't want any of that. I wouldn't choose any of that, but I'm sure there are people who would. I'm sure there are lots of people out there who'd be like, yes, I want to fully understand what these people went through. And this is giving you an opportunity to do that. So I think the technology is super interesting and has wide ranged applications. But the fact that it's like forced on people is kind of terrifying. Like, I wouldn't want to be a part of Starfleet if this is a possibility, that I could just be like, just going about our day, and then we see this weird probe, and suddenly I've lived 25 years in this other person's life, and then come to find out that my entire world is going to be destroyed, like, by the end of the year. It's just wild. Anyways, I'm going to check the chat, and then we'll be done. PS2 Chipper says, I think the device failed after Picard. I think so too. Randall says the flute does not really play. What do you mean the flute does not really play? Oh, do you mean in real life you can't actually play that flute? I feel like that's for the best, because to play a flute, you have to spit in it. So I think that thing went for, we talked about this in another episode, that flute went for auction for like lots and lots and lots of money. So it's probably good that it's not also full of spit. Windgrace says, if the probe is a one-shot deal, I guess it's lucky it wasn't a Paclid. Seriously, or like a Cardassian, or like a Romulan, or like Klingon, or the Binars, or lore, like. Nadia says, once again, Windgrace for the win. I totally agree. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me live. Thank you for everyone joining on the replay. We do this every week, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, where we talk all things Star Trek. Next week, if you're watching in real time, next week we are going to be talking about all things Worf, specifically from TNG. Because I cannot comment on his life in DS9 until I finish watching DS9. I can comment on his interactions and actions in Picard, but it doesn't seem right to skip a big chunk of his life, to just do TNG and then just do Picard. Like, there's a whole bunch of stories in there that I need to know. But the Picard story is going to be so great. And so I hope you join me then. And if you're watching on the replay, it's probably already out, so you could just watch it now. If you're watching in real time, also Happy New Year. And I value and appreciate you, and so excited to talk to other Trekkies and just geek out. This is just like the joy of my life. So I appreciate having you here. PS2 Chipper says, thank you so much. Happy New Year. Oh yeah. Okay. Randall says, yeah, it doesn't make real flute sounds. It's just a prop. Yes. So good to know. I did not know that. I thought it was a real flute, but I'm glad it's not, because, spit. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Windgrace says Worf. So that means hopefully you'll be here next week. And then Happy New Year. All right. So good night, everybody. See you next time.